Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for having me as your speaker this evening. This is a great turnout. I'm really excited to see that we have so many people who are interested in this topic. So today I'd like to share with you some tips that I've learned over the years on digitizing your images and then what to do with them once you have them digitized. Because getting them digitized is really only half the battle, especially if you're not able to find them and preserve the details that are in them. A lot of our printed media that we have that's been handed down to us over the years has notes on pages of photo albums and notes on the backs of things. There's pieces of paper tucked in with things, and preserving all of that information tells the story of the people who came before us. So that's going to be a lot of what we talk about today is how to preserve that metadata and make the most of that. So I'm Angela Andrieux, and I'm a fine art photographer. I like to photograph travel, cityscapes, landscapes. I do some street photography. I don't do portraits and weddings and things like that, but I do love taking pictures and have had the opportunity to travel around the world and photograph some of the most amazing places. I'm also a photo educator. I've been a photo coach for many years, helping people with their photography workflows, learning how to get things organized, backed up, make sure their stuff is safe, and then also helping with photo editing. More recently, I've gotten into photo restoration and things like that. So if you have questions in that realm, please feel free to ask and I can give some tips there as well. I'm also what I like to call my family's family historian. And that's because once you're a photographer, once you have all this software, people come to you and be like, hey, I've got this box of photos. Hey, here's this photo album. I see you have a scanner. What can you do for me? So I have been the person that my family gives these things to and have begun the process of digitizing. I've also been working with my dad, who's been digitizing all of my grandma's stuff that was left to him. And it's been an amazing process. And that's actually the library we're going to take a look at today is the one that my dad has primarily done the scanning on. I coached him on how to do all of the things, how to make sure they're coming at high resolution and archival quality. But being my family's family historian, I'm the one that makes sure all of these things are preserved and we get as much information from everyone in the family as possible to make sure those memories are preserved. And then finally, I work for a company called Mylio, and we make a product called Mylio Photos. This is a tool to help you gather and organize your lifetime of memories. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this today. I'm not going to go super in depth on the product because I know you guys are here to learn about metadata, but it is the tool that I use to organize my photos, to add that metadata and make sure all of those details are preserved. So if you have questions about it later, please feel free to get in touch and I'm happy to share that with you. So what we're going to talk about today is some tips for preparing your stuff for scanning, how to digitize your media, some things that I've learned to make sure you get the best archival quality. We'll discuss file naming and folder structure, important metadata. This is the story, recording that story behind your photos, what to do if you have missing information. And then finally, we'll go over backing up and protecting your archive because once you've done all of this work, you want to make sure that it's safe from, devices failing, natural disasters, and of course, being handed down to the next generation. So I mentioned that I work with Mylio Photos. So this is the tool that I use to have a single library that's accessible from all of my devices. The thing I like to say about Mylio Powers, it's a superpower, is that not only does it let me access my photos from all of my devices, it's that it's cross-platform. So whether you're on Mac, Windows, Android, or iOS, I can get to all of my stuff. And the thing that makes it unique is it is a peer-to-peer connection, meaning your devices talk directly to each other and you have full control over where your stuff is stored. If you want to put it in the cloud, great. If you want everything local, that's awesome too. So it's very flexible. And for the family historian, it respects metadata. It uses industry standard XMP files and the family history metadata working group standards to make sure that those details are portable. So just a few things about this. It's a lifetime library, helps you bring all your photos and videos into one place, has amazing search capabilities, connectivity between all of your devices. It does help with that backup process. I'll touch on that a little bit at the end. It lets you get to your stuff from all of your different devices. So whether you've got your computer at home with a ton of storage and that you have a phone with a little bit of storage, you can still access everything. And as I mentioned, it's cloud independent. So you choose where your stuff is stored. All right, so let's dive into actually digitizing your photos. When I get a photo album or a book or, something that I need to digitize, a box of photos, my mom has been known to hand me Ziploc bags full of stuff that she's found scattered about. What I do is try to start with a plan. So if you have a massive project in front of you, or if you're starting with something small, either way, you want to do a little bit of sorting before you dive in. So you want to sort by family line, time period, or event. Have some sort of thought as to how you want to group these things as you're bringing them into your computer. Later on, once they're digitized, that's going to make them a lot easier to find and to add that data. I also suggest as you're going through the physical prints, if there's duplicates, put them aside or get rid of them or hand them off to another family member. It's not really worth your time if you can at all avoid it to digitize the same picture twice, three times, especially if you're looking at stuff from the 80s and 90s when, oh, you want duplicates of your pictures? Yes, please. And then you end up with two of everything with the thought of, handing one of those off to somebody else, but, sometimes you don't. So get rid of those duplicates. Also pay attention to the quality of the photos. And by that, I mean, is it something worth preserving? This is going to be looking at a picture and going, okay, I have 5 really similar images. Are these all worth digitizing? Do they all tell a separate story? Or are, a handful of these really not great and this one here is really good? You have to be a little bit picky because when you're working with a massive project, digitization takes time and you want to make sure that you're using your time as wisely as possible. Also take note that the original order things were in, and if they have handwritten notes, whether in the margins of a photo album, on the back of images, things like that. That is really important context that you're going to want to record digitally later in that metadata. So with my own personal process, some of the things that I do is when I get, say, a photo album, and this has been kind of the thing that I've tackled the most, my grandmother will give me a photo album. And before I take it apart, I set it down on my coffee table in the living room and I just take my phone and I take pictures of each page. What this does is this gives me a sequential order of how she had it laid out. It records any of those notes on the margin. I can go to those pictures. I can zoom in and go, okay, what else is going on here? Because sometimes once you get things out of an album and they might get physically separated from each other. So you might not realize this picture over here goes with this picture over here. So taking pictures of each page of the album, I won't say it's a requirement, but I found it really, really helpful. And not only does it record the order and captures those handwritten notes, but if your family member decides after you've taken it apart, they're like, I'd really like to have that put back together. This hasn't happened to me, but I plan for it just in case because I wasn't really sure what my grandma was going to want. And I took all these pictures. So if you have to recreate that album and put things back together, you have a document that shows what it looked like. And these are not archival style pictures that I'm taking with my phone. These are just snapshots so I can see how things were laid out. They are not the scans that I'm doing of each picture. I will go through and do high resolution scans of each image later. All right, so let's get into the scanning. There are some best practices if you're digitizing your images that will give you the best results and give you the best archival quality. With any scanner, you're going to have a DPI setting, dots per inch, and this is your resolution. This is how much detail per square inch of media you have, and that's going to enable you to make things bigger, blow them up, and really see the detail in those pictures. So I recommend that you scan everything at least 600 DPI. If you're working with an older scanner or like a flatbed scanner, this can take some serious time. So scanning at 600 DPI can be a little time consuming. If you want to take it up a notch and go to 1200, if your machine supports that, that's even better, but that does take a very substantial amount of time. So for instance, with my scanner, if I scan things at 600, they go pretty fast. If I do 1200, I'm sitting there for several minutes per scan. So keep that in mind. 600 is a really solid place to start for an archival quality scan. The next thing to think about is how do you want to save these images? And the two typical formats you're going to come up to are going to be a TIFF or a JPEG. And there's pros and cons to each. Personally, I choose to save all of my scans as TIFFs because these are ideal for archiving and they are the most information and they are lossless. So you have, when you have file types, lossy and lossless. TIFF is a lossless file, so you can open it up, close it, open up, close it. You're not going to lose any information. With things like JPEGs, they take up a lot less space. They're widely compatible, easy to share, but JPEGs are a lossy compression. What that means is over time, and we're not talking about over the next couple of years, but over the next 15, 20 years, every time that JPEG is opened and closed, and especially if you save any changes, information is lost every time you do that. It's just a little tiny bit, but over time that can make a big difference. So I do recommend for things that are really important that you're wanting to create an archive of to bite the bullet, buy the bigger hard drive, and save the TIFF files. I think it's going to be well worth your time and efforts to do that. And TIFFs are pretty easy to read by a lot of different applications, easy to transport on computers, but you might have to down-res them if you're going to say send them in an email or something like that. So they're not as portable, but they are archival. The next thing to think about is scanning the backs of the photos. If the back of the photo or even the margin of your photo has information on it, you want to make sure to capture that. I'm going to talk about the scanners I use here on the next slide, but if you have the option to scan the backs of the images, if there's any text whatsoever on the back, I highly recommend capturing that too. Now, I often get asked, what about film, slides, movies? That is an excellent question, and some people love the idea of doing that themselves. The catch is that it takes a lot of expensive equipment. You probably can go on Amazon and you can find like a cheap film or slide scanner. Film, I think you can do a little bit more easily. Slides are a little bit more difficult. Typically, the equipment to do it well is costly, and most people don't have enough of those media to really warrant getting a whole setup. Now, if you're doing it professionally, that's something different. But if you're just doing this for yourself, I would recommend taking the film, slides, and home movies to somebody local and having them digitize it for you. Talk through the different quality standards that you want them to do, any kind of optimization of those files, making them look better, making them look more clear, things like that. But work with somebody local. And now there's a lot of other places that you can upload or ship your stuff to as well. There's lots of companies that do that. Personally, I like to support local. I like to support my local businesses. And also when it comes to my family history stuff, I would much rather keep my things in my possession, physically hand them off to a shop in my town, know exactly where they are. When they're done, I can go pick them up and bring them back, as opposed to boxing them up and handing them off to Postal Service, UPS, whatever service you want to use. I think that, the risk is still pretty low, but my personal preference is to always use local whenever possible. All right, let's take a look here and see if there's any questions. DPI would vary depending on the size of print or whether the printer negative. The DPI is going to be the same regardless of the size of the media. Now, the size that you end up with the result will depend on the size that you're scanning. So the dots per inch is just that. It's going to be the same number of dots per inch, so 600 in the case of what I was recommending. If you have a 1 inch by 1 inch picture, if you go up to an 8 by 10, you're obviously going to have many more inches in there. So it's going to be a higher pixel count for the whole thing, but it's still the same resolution per inch. Great question. All right, so for scanning, the tools that I use, the one that I love the most for home scanning. Now, if you're a professional digitizing person, I would not necessarily recommend this machine because it can be a little temperamental with excessive use, like heavy commercial use. But for the home scanner, somebody taking care of their own family history project, recording their own stuff, working through that type of project, this is an amazing little machine. It packs up relatively small, so it doesn't take up a big footprint in your office, and it is fast, and it does great high resolution archival scans. So what you do is you take your images, all of those things that you organized earlier, and you group them into stacks of prints that are the same size. So let's say your 4x6 images that you have from like the 80s and 90s. You're going to put those into a stack of about 30 a piece. You stick it there in the scanner, and it goes and pulls them through. It pulls them through the bottom. So it's pulling and grabbing it from the bottom, so it's not damaging the top of the picture. And it also has the possibility to scan the front and the back. And it can also give you an optimized version. So if those pictures are faded, if they've got discoloration, things like that, it will give you a version that also corrects for that. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. And it also works for pictures that are up to an 8 by 10. So I've used this from little tiny pictures all the way up to those 8 by 10s. And the only thing you really can't use it with is if something is damaged or you have adhesive on the back. If you have adhesive on the back, obviously a stack of pictures is going to stick together, so be very cautious of that. But if pictures are in good condition or stacks of the same size, you can put these in here and it'll flip through a stack of 30 in 1 to 2 minutes. It is so, so fast. So I highly recommend this machine. Pricing, I think, is somewhere between $400 and $600, depending on when you buy it. They have had sales around, say, Black Friday and things like that, that bring it down to that lower end. So keep an eye out. It's not an inexpensive piece of equipment, but if you have a big project that you're personally working on, I do recommend it. And it works brilliantly. I've been very, very happy with it. For the things that don't fit in the sheet feed, I have a flatbed scanner. Now, if you're doing this, if you're doing a big project and you're very, very critical about quality, you might want to go out and buy something like the Epson Perfection V600. That's an excellent flatbed scanner that will do, I think, everything you need. I think it even has the brackets in there to scan film if you wanted to do that. For myself, I don't have enough media to justify buying another piece of equipment, nor do I really have the counter space, desk space to put another big flatbed scanner. So I make use of what I have. I personally have an HP 8620. It's a few years old, actually probably more than a few years old at this point, but it's still chugging along and it's got a very reasonable flatbed scanner built into it. And I can do a 600 or 1200 DPI scan on this machine. And I can do it up to, I think it's about a legal size piece of paper. So it's not going to work for massive things, but it does get me bigger than the 8 by 10. It's also what I use when I have things that are fragile. So if something is too fragile or delicate to put through the sheet feeder, I can put it on the flatbed. Same with things that are bigger. Now, when I've had things that are very, very large, like I have some things in my collection that were prints that my great grandfather and great grandmother made when they were in camera clubs way, way back, long time ago. And these are 16 by 20 prints. Obviously, that's not going to fit very well on a flatbed scanner unless you have like a massive commercial sized one. That's where camera scanning can come in really handy. So you want to have a high resolution camera. I have a Canon R6. The R5 would work great. Any high resolution camera. I've also done this with medium format, which was actually 101, 102 megapixel camera. So basically you take a camera, mount it on a tripod, face it straight down, and take a picture of a well-lit picture that you have. For me, it was just on the floor. I lit it, took a picture, and that was my scan. And actually, if you go to a professional photo manager and a lot of these digitizing services, they utilize camera scanning because that actually gets you the best quality for what they do. But for the home user, for somebody who's doing this kind of project themselves, the Epson Fast Photo is an excellent place to start. Use the all-in-one printer scanner that you have at home, if that's what you have. Or if you want to buy a standalone scanner, that Epson Perfection is a really great way to go. Let me take a look here at the questions. All right, so what is an HEIC on my photo? I wanted to add my ancestry tree and it wouldn't allow it. Do I need to change it to another format? Which one? I tried to convert. Also, how do my photos become HEIC? I don't want to keep copying my photos to HEIC. All right, so excellent question. HEIC is a high efficiency format that is primarily used by Apple. There are some other cameras that capture this as well, but if you go into your settings on an iPhone, for instance, you can change it to be a JPEG, which is a more portable type of image. But HEICs are pretty widely recognized these days. Most image editors, image management programs will take HEIC files. For uploading them to certain websites, you probably would have to then convert it to a JPEG to go ahead and have that be accepted there, because I don't think many of those types of sites will accept an HEIC. All right, so let's see here. Myra says, may a JPEG be saved as a TIFF? Speaking of JPEGs, that has been filed online for years already. I'm not quite sure what that means there, but you can take a JPEG and you can save it as a TIFF, and that basically freezes that data at that point in time. So you're not going to have that degradation, which is nice. But It's not going to give you any data that wasn't already there. It can't create data out of thin air, but it does give you that higher quality file type that is archival. So not a bad idea. Also, what software may be used to open TIFF files? Pretty much any image management software can open a TIFF. It's not going to be ideal for, say, uploading to websites and things like that. You'll want to use something that can convert it to a JPEG for that purpose. But MyLeoPhoto is the tool that I use to organize my media, easily handles TIFFs. Lightroom, I'm trying to think of some of the other image management tools out there. The ones that usually run local on your machine are going to have no problem with your TIFF files. All right, let's see here. Do I have a recommendation for a flatbed that can accommodate legal size item? I don't know off the top of my head. I would have thought, say, the Epson V5550, it does not. Okay, I would have thought that that one would have done a legal size. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I can do a legal size. Maybe it's not a full true legal size. I'm gonna have to look into that, Mary. I'm not entirely sure what would be the best for a legal size item. Again, for larger items that aren't gonna fit on a flatbed scanner, that's where camera scanning is probably the next best option. Robin's saying, I assume the Epson doesn't work for photos on cardstock. I would say it's iffy. There is a setting on there for thicker media. So like if you have a Polaroid or like some sort of other instant film production that you have, they can go through there, but you have to change the setting. And I think there might be an extra slot on the back to feed through those slightly thicker types of media. But typically things that are on cardstock, things like that, I usually do put on the flatbed. All right. Linda's asking which Canon. So my Canon camera, I use a Canon R6. The current model of that is the R6 Mark II. If you are wanting to be serious about camera scanning, personally, at this point in time, I would recommend the Canon R5. There is also an R5 Mark II, but unless you're a big photography nut, I don't know that it'd be necessary to get the Mark II. The original Canon R5 is an amazing camera, and for that purpose, would do really, really well. If you are an archivist, and let's say you're working for a museum or something like that, that's when you might want to step up to something that's medium format, which is a higher resolution. And I would go with a Fujifilm medium format camera for that. I did have a chance to test some of those out for camera scanning, and they are mind-blowing. The quality and the resolution of what you get just is insane. But you're talking about, with the Fujifilm medium format, you're talking about a camera that just for the body without a lens starts at $5,000. So it does get quite pricey. I think like the Canon R5 original, you probably can get for about $2,500 to $2,500 at this point. The R5 Mark II, if you're, camera nut and you wanted to have an excuse to buy a really nice camera, I think $3,200, I think is where that one comes in. So you have some different price points you can think of. In the big scheme of things, if you're looking at buying a camera for camera scanning versus something like a $600 scanner, the $600 scanner is definitely more affordable. All right. And Mary, thank you for clarifying that Epson 550 does A4, but not full US legal. Good to know. Excellent questions so far. So let me go ahead and go back here into the presentation. And let's talk about creating a file structure. So now that you've started scanning all of your media, you want to know how to name it and how to be able to find it later. And there's a lot of different schools of thought on how to do this. And the way that I do my modern media is a little bit different than what I do with my historical media. With stuff that's modern that comes off of my big camera when I'm out shooting and doing stuff, making content today, my format is similar. I'll do the year, month, and then I'll do day, and then the event or a short description. For stuff that's historical, typically we don't necessarily have that much detail. So you might have the year and month, or maybe even just the year. So over here on the right, this is actually a screenshot from MyLeoPhotos from my folder system. And these are the ones my dad created as he was scanning my other grandmother's albums. And you can see he put a year that was kind of the primary year, or even 1940s to indicate a decade. And then a short description to follow along with that. Basically, you don't want to end up with a folder that just says scans or family history, because that's going to make it really, really hard to sort through. So having some way to subgroup those things into folders that make sense to you is really, really good. So something like 1952-06_wedding. That's a really good one. And then for file naming, so the individual files, this is going to be done as you're doing stuff on the scanner. So in your scanner preferences, it'll usually have a way to do this. One thing I love about that Epson Fast Photo is it's got a great naming convention for those pictures. And it's going to take the information that you input before you scan. It's going to ask you, when was this? It's going to ask you for a short description. And it's actually going to formulate that into your file name for you. I find that to be really, really helpful. So anything you can do to make those slightly descriptive. So it's not just image 123. Image 123 is, nobody knows what that is. You have to open it and look at it. Whereas if it's, 1950s album, 1950, 1951, that makes it a lot easier to figure out what might be there. The other thing is if you're scanning multiple versions of an image. So again, with that fast photo, it does the front, it does the back, and then it also does that optimized version. So it automatically will create an _A and _B for those optimized versions and the backs. That way, when you sort your folder, whether it's in Mylio, whether it's in your folder system, whatever, whenever you sort by file name, all three of those images will be together. And that's what you want. You want to be able to keep those things together and be able to gather that information. All right, so once you've got your stuff into your computer, we want to start adding that metadata. The metadata is the story. That's your dates, the background information, the places, the people who are in those pictures. That is the stuff that makes these images come alive. That's what makes these images, generation proof. You can hand off pictures to me from, a couple generations back, but if nobody tells me who's in those pictures, it's really hard to connect with them. But when I see a picture and I see that my dad went in and named that and says who it is, that picture suddenly becomes really, really meaningful. So the one you're seeing up on the screen right now, that's actually right here. This is my grandma, my dad's mom, and this is her brother. And this picture, I remember seeing it at my grandma's house when I was young. Super cute picture. And when she passed, it was one of the things in the house that I think the picture exists somewhere else, but I ended up with a little frame. Nobody else wanted it. And I was like, this is too cute to let go. So I went ahead and I pulled that picture out of the frame, flipped it over on the back, and it said it was Joseph H2, birth at age 4 in El Paso, Texas. And so from that information, I was able to piece together a little bit of the story. I was able to put in GPS or location information for El Paso. And based on knowing my grandma's birth date, I don't know my great uncle's birth date. I probably can go into like Family Search and look that up. But from my grandma's birth date, I was able to deduce that this was between July 4th, 36 and July 4th, 1937. So I'm able to add that information into the pictures to preserve it. And that way, the next person who comes along after me and looks at this picture can understand more of the context. And if that's, my nieces and nephews, they're looking at this and going, oh, that's who this is. That's how they're connected to me. That's why this should mean something. So that's why we add metadata. Preserves those key details. It also makes things searchable. As you add metadata, and especially using a program like Mylio Photos or something that then aggregates that metadata into a searchable format, it makes things easy to find. So if you've gone through your pictures and you've done this work and then a year or two later, you're like, I know I saw this picture and it was of so-and-so at this place. Having input that information makes it searchable. One of the things I love about Mylio Photos is it makes this metadata industry standard. So it saves all of the metadata that you add in an XMP file, which is an industry standard format that's a little tiny like text file that sits next to your pictures in the file system. And it's readable by just about any other image management software out there. So it's not proprietary to Mylio. It can be used everywhere. We also do our best to follow the Family History Metadata Working Group standards. So there's a standard that's starting to be developed. It's not entirely widely accepted yet by all of the different ancestry companies, but more and more of them are adopting it. And I know Family Search is big on this, and I think some of the other bigger companies are starting to get on board with this as well, and realizing that there's a standard that needs to be set so all of these things can be preserved and accessed by the next generation. And also adding this information, like I said, it future-proofs that collection. If you want to hand this stuff off to the next generation, making sure they know how it's connected to them is really what makes it matter. So what details do you want to preserve when you have this information? Well, I like to get as close to as I can with the date. So if you have it, the full date is great. And sometimes even by the context of the image, you can be like, That was obviously Christmas morning, so we know that was in the morning. You can be a little bit more specific on some of them, but some of them you're be like, yeah, I think that was in the 50s. I think that might have been in the 30s. And you want to be able to make it as close as you can, but you still want to preserve that information, whatever it is. One thing I like about Mylio Photos is if you don't have a full date and a full timestamp, you can put in what we call a fuzzy date. So you can just say 1920s or in 1890 or whatever it was. You can go ahead and add that non-specific date and have that information be preserved. I also recommend adding descriptive information. So you have a title and a caption or description field in most applications. This is where you tell the story. So the title is going to be kind of that short form, just a blurb, a sentence, something like that. And then your caption or description is where you can tell a little bit more of the story. Typically, these fields don't have a very, like if you look at it here in Mylio, it looks like a small field, but it's actually, I don't even think it has a character limit. Like you can put a lot of information there. It's a little bit cumbersome. So I do recommend like writing it out in your word processor and copying it in here, but you can still save that information there and it embeds it in that XMP file that sits next to your photo. Then there's also keywords. This is the part that makes things really searchable. So you could put in things like baby, you could put in wedding, you could put in birthday, all of those things that kind of like jump out. You could put in family names, you could put in group names, whatever it is, it's going to help you access this later, help you remember it. That's what I would put into your keywords field. And then finally, tagging people. There are different ways to go about doing this. What I love about doing it in Mylio Photos, again, is it's that industry standard format. In a lot of other more commercially available programs, I don't want to like name names or throw anybody under the bus, but a lot of them are only in their system. And if you take that picture out and go someplace else, that face tag doesn't go along with it. With Mylio, it's saved to the metadata and you have that information as part of the record with that particular image. And if you go ahead and tag an actual region in the picture, it actually marks that region. So I think that's really pretty cool. With Mylio Photos, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it has AI facial recognition to help you go through and locate recognizable faces and then tag them. It becomes almost like a game in the software. It's something I really enjoy doing. And then finally, like I mentioned earlier, use that clear, consistent naming in your file names. All of this makes things easier to search and find later. All right, so let's talk about face tagging. So with a tool like Mylio Photos, what happens when you bring your pictures in is it's looking for recognizable faces and it groups together similar faces so you can really quickly go through and tag all of those people. And this helps you identify people across generations. It does an amazing job of recognizing people from when they're young to when they're old. It's not always perfect. AI, as we know, is a tool. It's not as smart as we are, but it does a really good job. And once I've tagged somebody 5 to 10 times, it gets to know their facial features. And then I can go ahead and just accept a whole bunch of images and be like, yes, those are all this person. And then when I turn on the face tagging in Mylio, I get something like this to where I can see, okay, who's in this picture? I know I'm supposed to know these people, but who are they? And like in this one here, I need to figure out who that baby is. I'm pretty sure that's my Aunt Claudia, but I need to figure out, and then I can tag that little baby there too. So how to tag people. Mylio automatically detects those faces. A lot of programs do this. You can go into the people view. There's an untagged category. So anytime it recognizes that there's a face, you go into that untagged, it's like your to-do list, and you start tagging people. It also has batch face tagging and integration with Family Search. So if you choose to share an image from Mylio Photos to Family Search, that information travels with it, which I think is really cool. All right, let me take a look here at the chat and see if there's questions. All right, I have stolen photos of old towns from computer. Later, I could not view them. They became 60/100. Can I convert? Sindra, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. If you could give me a little bit more background, I would appreciate that. I'm not entirely sure the context here. All right, Myra says, what's the advantage of placing the underline between each file name word? So this used to be more of a big deal than it is now. In today's computers, if you have a space in a file name, it's typically not a problem. Historically, you had to have either between words an underscore or a dash. So I do that just out of habit and also for longevity. because computer systems change and I want to make sure that these things last the test of time. So the file naming convention I'm using is kind of old, but it still works and is still the most reliable. Also, if you go to upload something to a website and it has a space in the file name, sometimes websites don't like that. Again, technology's come a long ways and there are ways around a lot of these things now, but it's still a best practice to add either an underscore or a dash between your words in a file name. Let's see here. And Barbara's asking, will you be telling us how to add metadata? I don't have a clue. Yeah, I can totally show you how to do that. Absolutely. All right, and then where does the metadata go? So I think that's probably the same question. How do you add it? Let me go ahead and I'm going to show you. So let me go ahead and pull that off to the other screen here. And I'm going to jump over to my Leo Photos. So this is the all photos view. This is everything that my dad scanned. And if I go here to the folders, these are actual folders that live on my hard drive that I have here. So I can go into any of these pictures or any of these folders and take a look at these images. And let's say I want to add some information. Let's look at this one right here. I can tell you just without even turning on the face tagging, this is my grandma and grandpa, and I'm pretty sure that's my Uncle Bruce. He was their firstborn. So here in my Leo Photos, the way that I add metadata is I go over here to the info panel. It's over here on the right. Open that up, and it gives me this whole panel of places where I can enter information. So I've already entered in here the dates, 1950s. It's showing known people. So if I turn on my face tagging, the faces have already been tagged, which is great. And then I can go ahead and put in a title and description. So if I had more context or information, I could add that description and title in here. If I knew where this picture was taken, which my dad might know, he might have an idea of where my grandparents lived when my uncle was tiny like this. I think it was probably here in California, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I could go down here and open this up, and let's just say it was in San Luis Obispo. I'm gonna go ahead and type that in. There we go. Pull that up. And then I could go ahead and right click on this here, and that pops it onto the map, and that's going to add that GPS information, that location information to my picture. Now I'm going to go ahead and not add that right now because I don't know that that's where that goes, but that's how easy it is to add information. Once I do this, Mylio will take care of creating that XMP file, and that'll sit in my file system next to the picture with that information. So if I right click on this here, and I say reveal an external, we'll see if this will come up. Sometimes my drives are a little slow, especially when I'm streaming, but we'll see that those files are just sitting here in my file system. Mylio gives me a really beautiful way to browse and interact with them, but everything is in my file system. So if I ever wanted to take these pictures and take them somewhere else or use them in some other way, they're not locked up in a proprietary format. And my drive is being super duper slow. But in a nutshell, that's how you edit your metadata or add metadata to your photos. And as I said, there's a lot of different applications you can use. This just happens to be the tool that I use to do this kind of work. All right. And let's take a look here. It looks like there's a couple more questions. Let's see here from Sindra. So it looks like maybe it was screenshots or pictures that were downloaded from another website. If you're not able to see them in your computer system, it sounds like there's nothing there. So I'm not sure how you would be able to make use of those. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and go back here into the rest of the presentation and talk about naming. So this is with specifically people names and with dates. So let's start with dates. I mentioned you want to get as close to the actual date of the image as possible. So if you don't have that exact date, you can use that fuzzy or non-specific date. And then also with photos, we typically want to try to record the date it was captured. If it's a document, and that's one thing, Mylio can also hold your documents. You can put in the document creation date. So I take the date that's usually on a dated form. That's the date that I'm going to go ahead and put in the date field there in Mylio. So you'll see here I have this marked as 1950s. I can go ahead and click on this little ellipses here, and there's different date formats that I can use. If I don't know when this was taken, I can click undated, and then that puts that into another to-do list for me to research. Otherwise, I can go ahead and just assign the proper date, and that goes ahead and gets me where I need to be with that. With people names, it's best to use a standard format and to be consistent. So what I like to do is focus on the birth name, person's birth name, and standardize with first, middle, and last. I also will put a married name in parentheses. So if somebody, like for myself, I have my full name, and then in parentheses, I have my married name. If you want to add a nickname, if somebody regularly goes by another name, I do it like this. I'll put the first, middle, and then in quotes, I'll put the nickname, last name, and then maiden name. So when I put this into something like my Leo Photos, the middle name I put into the first name field. So as you can see here, Angela Louise. And then last name, I'll put in the last name and then the parentheses with the married name. If somebody has a suffix like junior, senior, first, second, third, again, I would put that at the end of the last name. So that's the formatting I use. Whatever formatting you choose, I just recommend being super, super consistent. All right. So then let's go ahead and move on to keeping your memories safe. Everything we've talked about up to this point is a ton of work. I'm not going to lie, this is a big project to get into. So if you're not up to doing this whole project, also think about working with somebody who's like a professional photo manager. Those people exist and they do an amazing job of helping you get all this stuff organized and to a point where you can just enjoy it. But whatever you're doing, and when you get this lump of digital stuff, whether you created it or somebody else does it for you, it's so important to back it up and keep it safe. There are so many things that can happen to digital files. And there's so many things that can happen to your physical files as well. So whether it's in your filing cabinet or on your shelf in your living room, there are a number of different things that can damage these precious memories. So by digitizing them, if you still have the physical copies, that's essentially creating kind of a backup, right? Because that way you can grab your hard drive if you need to run out of the house rather than trying to grab 15 photo albums, knowing that that stuff is in a specific place that you can grab. Now, if the digital copy is all you have, and for a lot of us, our digital photos, that might be the only copy of that image that we have. We want to make sure we have more than one. So what we're going to talk about is the 3-2-1 backup rule. And this basically is having 3 copies of your media on at least 2 different types of devices, and ideally with one of them off-site. So what that means, what that looks like in practice is, let's say you have your computer on a hard drive and that's where your pictures are stored. Having a second hard drive that has all of that information mirrored would be the number 2. And then if you have a cloud service that's backing everything else up, that would be your offsite copy. The reason for this is hard drives fail. No matter what, it doesn't matter if you buy an expensive drive or a cheap drive, they're all going to fail. And it really, in my experience, so I think the average life of a hard drive, whether it's in your computer or a standalone drive, you're talking 3 to 5 years. And it can actually, I think, be even a little shorter than that, like maybe a 2 to 5 years. It's kind of what you can count on for a drive. In my experience, it's either going to fail in those first couple of months or it's going to fail towards the end of the 5 years. And sometimes they go on far beyond that. But hard drives will die. So that's why it's so important to have more than one copy of your stuff. So you can take that second copy and then make another copy if that first drive fails. You want to make sure you have more than one. Keep your stuff that's important to you in more than one place. That's going to help you if your hard drive dies at home, things like that. But what if there's a natural disaster? We've been hearing so much on the news about really terrible things happening in a lot of different parts of the country where people are losing everything. And if something happens to your home, all of those precious memories, all of this work that you've done, all of those stories can so easily be lost. And I don't want that for you. That's where offsite backup comes in so handy. And that's where the cloud can be a really powerful tool. That's my first choice for doing an offsite backup because it's easy, it's accessible, but not everybody likes the cloud. So having another copy that you keep at another family member's house across town, or even in a different outbuilding on your property can be another level of protection. So you don't necessarily have to have something in the cloud, because I know a lot of people don't necessarily want to do that, but the cloud is a great option for this. So what that looks like here in my library is I have my computer and my hard drives that have all my media here at home. I use a Mac, so there's a utility built into Mac called Time Machine. And that's a free utility. So all I have to do is go buy another hard drive that holds all of my data, and Time Machine will make a copy of everything that's on my computer, my connected drives, to that Time Machine. So there we go. There's my 1 and 2, or my 3 and my 2. My next thing is the 1, and that's where I use a service called Backblaze. And I can go ahead and put that into the chat if anybody is interested. Some of you here might already know about this, but it is a service that allows you to have unlimited storage in the cloud. It backs up your computer and all your connected drives. I want to say it's about $180, $190 for 2 years, and it's unlimited. Now, this is for individual use. This is not a commercial tool, but Backblaze is one of the most respected and industry leading cloud storage out there. And they do have commercial storage if you are in position that you need that as well. So that's one way to go about doing that. If you're using a service like Mylio Photos, Mylio also has what we call vaults. And that's where you can designate a specific hard drive or even a cloud service to be a vault. And Mylio will make an entire copy of your library to those various devices. So whatever way you want to go about doing this, the best thing to do is to automate it. Make sure you set it up so that you don't have to think about it. If you have to push a button, which seems really easy in the moment, you're like, I can totally remember to push a button. You're not going to remember to push a button. You might the first couple of months, but after a while, like, oh, I get that tomorrow. I'll get to that tomorrow. And then suddenly the habit is broken. Automation is the way to do your backups and to make sure your stuff stays safe. So there are a lot of different ways that you can put this together, but keep in mind, whatever system you're using, the 3-2-1 rule. 3 copies of your data on at least 2 different types of devices and keep one of them offsite. That's going to protect you from both drive failure, hardware failure, and natural disaster. All right, let's see here. Looks like we have another question. The file name said scan3. It had saved in both TIFF and XML format. Did that file save in both formats simultaneously? So the XML is probably something that was downloaded from the web. So I would probably take a look at that. You probably don't need to keep the XML file, but the TIFF file you'll want to keep. If it's an XMP, that's different. So XML is usually web-based, something that comes down from a website. XMP is metadata. So I would take a look at that and just clarify before you get rid of the one file. All right, so just to kind of wrap things up, some things to remember as you digitize your photos. Take a few moments to organize things before you scan. Or if it's a big project, the organization part might be a fair amount of time. You're going to want to take a look at the different events, the different time periods you're working with. And if you're using something like an Epson Fast Photo Scanner, the sizes of the media. I went through those photo albums, and every few pages I would group together those pictures that were the same size because I could put them all through the sheet feeder. So organizing those things and giving yourself a system is going to make the process much more smooth. And once you have that system down, just keep replicating it. Stay consistent. There's going to be a lot of people out there be like, oh, well, you should try doing it this way. You should try doing it this way. Once you've started, stick with your system. If you try to switch things up midstream, I won't say that there's not a good reason sometimes to do that, but for the most part, just stay consistent. You're going to end up with a much better end result and a much more organized end result. When you're doing your scanning, make sure you're using archival settings. Go for that 600 DPI setting on your scanner. It will take a little bit longer, especially on those flatbed machines, and especially if it's older and not a super high quality one like my all-in-one machine at 600 or 1200. It's very time consuming, but highly worth it. Take the time to get the high quality scan. Also make sure that you're saving that in an archival file format. I do highly recommend saving them as TIFFs. JPEGs take up less space, they are more portable, they're easier to share, but every time you open and close a JPEG, you're losing a minute amount of data. And I hate that. Like it just, I don't want to lose those precious things that I just spent all this time organizing. Use consistent naming for both your files and folders. Again, you can use a format that you choose. I choose to use a year, month, day, or year, month, and then underscore and an event or a description. That works the best for me. And then adding the meaningful metadata, the stories, the context, all of the things that you want the next generation to know about that picture. Because if you know about it and you don't record that, that information's lost, that story is gone. So make sure you're recording as much of that information as possible. And then finally, after you've done all of this work, or even as you're doing this work, make sure you're creating backups. You don't want to end up in a situation where you are in this project and you've spent all this time and this is precious, precious material and your hard drive crashes and you only had the one copy. I don't want that for anybody. I've seen too many people I work with go through this and it's gut-wrenching. So I want you guys to go out, buy the extra hard drive. I know it's an extra expense. Go to your big box store, go to your Costco. Big hard drives are relatively inexpensive these days. And make sure you have more than one copy. So back up often, keep it automated, and that's going to give you so much peace of mind. And so with that, that is my presentation for scanning and for digitizing. I think, Mylio Photos is an excellent tool for keeping all of this organized, for adding all of that metadata. I really hope you guys will check it out. If you have questions about it, please let me know. And let's go ahead and see if there's any other questions.
It does look like we have one here. Someone's asking what kind of jobs are out there for this type of work. Are there any niche jobs that may not show up on an internet search?
Oh, that's a really good question. So if you're interested in doing this kind of work, I would check out the photo managers. This is a professional organization that facilitates people who are professional photo managers. And by that, what people are doing as photo managers, it can really span a big gamut. So people get into that because they're home organizers, and people get into that because they're genealogists and ancestry, they're big into that. But to learn the tools of how to keep things organized, to get really into the nitty gritty, to learn about the digitization, to learn what equipment is useful, I would go to the photo managers. Their CEO, Kathy Nelson, is incredible. She's a wealth of knowledge. They have all sorts of certifications and courses to learn about this stuff and help you find clients that do this. Now, I will say most people are going to be freelancing and having their own business doing this kind of work. It's not something you're typically going to go out there and find a regular job for. Although in your area, especially if you live in a big city, there probably are people out there who are doing this, and they might be able to offer some part-time work, or maybe if they've got a big place, a full-time option for that. So that's what I would look for photo organizing, digitization, photo restoration. Anything within that field, I think, would give you a little bit wider reach in your hunt.
Thank you. It
Welcome.
looks like our next question, someone is asking what the cost of Mylio is.
Yeah, so it starts for an individual license at $240 a year. And what that gives you is as many devices as you want to connect. There's no limit to the amount of pictures you can put in there because you're using your own storage. If you run out of storage space, you just go buy another drive, connect it. It's very privacy focused. And like I said, it works on Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android, or any combination thereof. So I know people who are very Apple centric, for example. They're like, well, my iPhone and my iPad and my Mac all talk together just fine. But the people who have an Android phone, an iPad, and a Windows computer, trying to get all of those pictures into one place, that can be really, really tricky. And Mylio solves that problem. So that's something to think about. There are also family plans available for Mylio Photos. I believe there's currently one available for what we're calling the Duo plan, which lets you have two people on your account and helps you get set up. That's another thing to mention is that with Mylio Photos, every single membership comes with a one-on-one onboarding to help you get started. So you'll get the opportunity to set up a Zoom call with one of our experts, and they'll walk you through those first steps to get you started on this journey. Mylio Photos will work with the stuff that you've already digitized, or as you're digitizing it, it's a place to put it. Mylio does not digitize pictures for you, though.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have somebody asking if you would please repeat your contact email.
Yeah, let me go ahead and put this into the chat for you. I'm just going to say
Thank
it's
you.
Angela@mylio.com, and you can reach out to me and ask me any questions that you have about Mylio or about the presentation, any of the tips that I suggested. See, Carol says, if a hard drive fails, should a new one be used to replace the older one periodically? Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. So if you have one that fails and you have your backup, use that backup to basically create another backup and replace
Thank
the
you.
drive that failed.
So it looks like we have time for just one more. If you could please show the first slide again about the
Absolutely.
benefits of Mylio.
Oh, yeah, let's go ahead and go back to that here. So there we go. I think this was the slide that they were looking for. You're
Great, thank you. And I will
welcome.
go ahead and stick our email address in the chat as well, genealogy@acpl.info. So if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to email us, or if you would like a copy of the chat, and we will send that to you. So thank you again, Angela, so much for your time and for answering all of our questions. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here, and I hope everybody enjoyed the presentation.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.